Hey everybody, today is Monday, April 8th, 2024. Coming up on the show today, from Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, editor Nathan Orloff.
Editing teams are all completely different. Especially as an assistant, I've worked on shows that have had clear divides of I get reels 1, 3, and 6. Only in the extreme cases would the director be like, you know, I want the other editor to take a pass at this. But otherwise, it's sort of, this is my territory. I have ownership of this.
And editor Shane Reid.
Venkman is just a wild card and always has been. And so you're looking for a different set of rules for Bill. You're looking for Venkman to challenge the seriousness of the situation.
Yes, all that and more on this edition of The Rough Cut. Well, hey gang, thanks for clocking in here on the podcast. Good to have you aboard. I'll tell you up front, this is an express train today. We will be moving pretty fast. I got a lot going on at the moment. There's this big trade show called NAB. That's the National Association of Broadcasters. A lot of you are probably familiar with it. It takes place in Vegas every April. This year, that would be April 14th to the 17th. For those of you not familiar with NAB, it's kind of the unofficial start to the year in terms of companies showcasing their latest offerings in the world of broadcasting and post-production. Probably podcasting as well. I should look into that. I need all the help I can get with that one. Anyway, my day job at Avid compels me to be there. So if there's any chance that you may be going, let me know. It would be great to see you. So feel free to email me at matt@theroughcutpod.com and just let me know. You can email me even if you aren't going. I love hearing from you, you know that. Okay, so that's NAB, and right now it's taking up a lot of my time and will probably put a 1 or 2 week dent in the podcast schedule. Sorry about that. But we have a show today, and we need to jump right into it. Today we are talking about Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, the latest installment in the recently unthawed franchise. Here to talk to us about cutting the film are Nathan Orloff and Shane Reid. Nathan is no stranger to the Rough Cut. He was on most recently to talk about cutting John Wick 4. Prior to that, he was on to talk about editing Ghostbusters Afterlife. For that one, he was co-editing with editor Dana Glauberman. This time, he is joined by Shane Reid. And we are meeting Shane for the first time today. At least I am. Maybe you know him already. He is new to Ghostbusters as far as working on it goes. I'm sure he's heard of it before. He is also new to the podcast, so welcome, new guy. Both Nathan and Shane are currently cutting other projects. Shane, as you will hear, is working on Deadpool and Wolverine, so count on this not being the last time we talk to him, if I can help it. I do not think Nathan can disclose what he's working on right now, so I'll just say that he's working. But hopefully we talk to him again later this year for what sounds like a really cool project. We will talk to Shane and Nathan in mere minutes. Mere ones, honestly. But first, a couple of important details to work into the show. First is a great way for you to maximize your Rough Cut dollar, which is all upside for you because you don't pay anything for this wonderfulness to begin with. So what you can do is head on over to blog.frame.io/theroughcut, where you can read a very, very accurate transcription of the words expressed here on the show. That's right, you can read the Rough Cut. And you can still listen to it with the player that's embedded right there in the blog. And of course, scattered lovingly throughout the blog are a cornucopia of multimedia delights to help enhance your experience. Images from the film or TV show, avid screen grabs from the editors, Spotify playlists of the needle drops, and other bits of goodness as well. To enjoy all that, I will remind you once again, dear listener, to visit blog.frame.io/theroughcut. Here's a little more sound advice for you. It's about how you can make your film or TV show, which I'm sure is already really good, that much better. And you do that by visiting those titans of tone at Extreme Music. They are the industry leader when it comes to production audio. What makes them so amazing? Well, it all starts with the music, of course, and the top-shelf talent they have making it. Collectively, those musicians and composers have created an enormous catalog of tracks that you can audition right from your favorite browser. Finding what you need is simple, either by providing them with musical keywords like tempo, genre, lyrics, composer, or you can speed things along by sending Extreme Music a track you like, and then they will fly through their catalog to find you ones like it. You have options for instrumentation, you have options for track length, you have options for how you license the music, either online or by talking with one of their reps. You can't beat that, so don't even try. Just go to Extreme Music so your next film or TV show can sound its very best. All right then, time to hop in the Ecto-1 to talk a little editing. From Ghostbusters Frozen Empire, here are Nathan Orloff and Shane Reid.
No, I just said yeah, and I was like, well, that's not much to contribute.
I should have said, okay, now we're going to go.
Nice.
Well, Nathan, last time we spoke, was for John Wick 4. Prior to that was Ghostbusters Afterlife. So your association with this film is kind of self-evident. Shane, you get the honor of kicking things off with how you got this gig. So the floor is yours.
I edited an Apple commercial that Jason and Ivan directed together almost 2 years ago. And it was their first time directing together. And I dealt with Ivan mostly because Jason was doing press for Afterlife. So I'm in with the agency and I'm getting calls on my phone that just say Ivan Reitman, and it always like blew my mind. And I take the call outside and he was just really so sharp and funny and just such a legend. And I was really pinching myself to work with him. And pretty soon after that, Ivan unfortunately passed away. And, Jason and I had spoken a little bit during the ad. And I wrote Jason an email. I just knew how important Ivan was to him. And I'm a father myself. And, so I wrote him an email that I debated for a little while because, that's a very intimate thing. And I didn't know him that well. And I just said, look, I'm not going to pretend to know your family from this one experience, but all I can offer you that anybody would want in a time like this is like a story about your dad that you just don't know. And so I sort of wrote a little bit about our conversations and what I gleaned from him and his sense of humor and how he ribbed the agency. And he was just a fun guy. And Jason was really quite moved by that, wrote me an email back that was really nice and asked if I would be able to find someone to help him make a memorial service video for Ivan. And I just offered myself up, and he thought that was too much. He didn't want to put me in that position. And I said to him, like, look, Ivan's a legend and I grew up watching his films, and like, are you kidding me? If I can do anything to give back to him or to his family, like that would be an honor. And so we got to really like dive into working together that way. We built this like 15-minute little, maybe 10-minute little documentary for his service. And it was a great experience with Jason because there was no script, there was no budget, there was no, it was all personal to him. And it was just us inventing something. So it was really like a way for us to kind of like really let our minds be creative together. And I think we just bonded over that experience. And when this film came up, he was like, I want to bring you on board. And he thought I'd really work well with Nathan, and Nathan was on already. And I think he just, Jason has really wonderful, talented people around him. And I think fortunately, he felt like I could slot into that world.
Well, that's really cool that you got to honor Ivan that way and work with Jason like that.
Mm-hmm.
Nathan, Gil Keenan, was a writer on Ghostbusters Afterlife, but now he's a writer and the director. So when you were on Afterlife, even though he wasn't directing then, did you have much interaction with him, enough to build some kind of rapport or get a sense of how he likes to work?
Actually, interestingly, I mean, especially since towards the end of post, Gil was also busy shooting his film in London with Netflix, and I only got to interact with him a few times, and I mean, him and Jason are so close, and there's such a wonderful relationship, both personally and professionally, that I never really was sort of in between that. And also, I'll also say it's kind of a testament to Jason, is that Jason is very insular on his editorial. So it's like, it's not that it's like, you don't get to talk to my editors. It's more like the feedback that Gil might have had on any cuts were to Jason and not to either me or Dana. So all my experiences with Gil were brief and pleasant, but nothing that's a sort of any sort of deeper relationship professionally until this project.
When we talk about films that aren't part of a franchise, a lot of times the references question will come up. What other films, what other projects, what other properties did the director draw from to give you as a reference? So you would think in a franchise, well, this is already pretty well established. We have Ghostbusters Afterlife, we have the OG films. But something I thought was interesting was that Kumail Nanjiani, who plays Nadeem in the film, in an interview talked about the animated series, The Real Ghostbusters, being a specific point of reference that Gil had. Tell me about what he may have said to you guys about that and how you could really draw from something like that.
Personally, and this is also like, I was finishing John Wick and I arrived in London, I think a week or two late. So I might have missed some of the conversations. I worked on some of the previs for a very short amount of time, months before shooting, but I never had any conversations about the Real Ghostbusters animated TV series.
No, that was from Kumail. That was the first time I heard it as well. And that might have been something that they talked about as characters and actors and directors more. But we didn't reference that. I think you're right in the sense that, you're making a Ghostbusters film. There's a Ghostbusters tone. There's a Ghostbusters pace that kind of exists within those films. And it's not a full departure in the fact that it's tethered to that legacy. But I think that if we were referencing anything, it was probably more folklore and horror, and he really wanted to try and make some things truly scary, and he wanted to bring sort of a fairy tale haunted imagery that you might have read as a kid to life. So I feel like those were the references we discussed more.
That's interesting that you bring up the tone and talking about those references. And again, speaking of the character Nadim, he seems to carry the lion's share of the jokes in the film. And I emphasize that because Finn Wolfhard connection aside, the tone of the film is more Stranger Things and less joke, 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 joke. Same was kind of true of Ghostbusters Afterlife. The films are a bit darker with a greater emphasis on the sci-fi or the folklore elements, as you said, Shane. Tell me a little bit more about dialing in that tone and how you use Nadim as sort of the main thrust of a lot of the comedy.
I mean, Kumail's I've always been a fan of Kumail, and I think that the audience is a fan of Kumail, and he's such a cool actor in the way that he started as such a comedy force and then really has sort of grown and matured into this really interesting, flourishing career. But I feel like maybe he was really excited to just go and have some fun again. I mean, he was written that way, but, he just really brought this, I'm so stoked to be in a Ghostbusters movie. And he just delivered really strongly that was it's not that the other characters aren't funny. It's that he just cuts through. And every time you saw his dailies, it was a delight. And you knew that it would work in the places that you needed it to work in the film.
I'd say also, I liked Patton's tone of humor that brought to the film. I felt like it fit in that Ghostbusters style of we're explaining the end of the world, but here's a joke about it. And I'll be honest, in doing two of these now, and I feel like I almost forgot the lesson of the first one doing this one. It's kind of hard to add stakes and also be funny. And to ride that tone, to have the actors and the direction to accomplish that is a testament to Gil and the people he's cast.
What was the timeline for this film in terms of production and post? And when did you each start on it?
So we started in end of March, basically, and production was for 3 months. And Shane and I cut on those 3 months in London, out in Winnersh. And then Shane went on to do the production of Deadpool. That started. So after production wrapped, I did 3 months. So the director's cut's also in London and Soho. And then we came back to show Sony the cut and moved all of editorial to LA. And then that's when Shane also came back and joined us because the strikes had paused production on Deadpool. Then we spent sort of next few months working on the edits and figuring out pickups we needed and reworking and retweaking and finding the movie, honestly, like every kind of movie in this scale does at that point. And then started sound mixing in January.
So Nathan, I'd like to hear a little bit more about the previs aspect of it. I mean, you actually started early doing previs for the film. How were you able to do that? And what kind of previs were you being asked to do?
It was only about 2 weeks of work. They already had a cut that internally DNEG created of the sewer dragon chase. And it was sort of about getting some music to it and restructuring some of the jokes. And then we kind of set it aside after a few weeks in December. And that became kind of the target for what they were going to do when shooting came.
So I asked you each about getting on the film. I don't think the two of you have worked together before. I could be wrong. When you did get together, what discussions did you have early on in terms of getting to know one another and the processes you each like to employ during post?
We hadn't worked together before. We just met on this and we got along wonderfully. Really enjoyed working together. But I remember our first meeting, we met at Sony, and I think the first conversation was really around, Nathan was really asking me, because we're just learning about our sensibilities, right? So I think Nathan was asking me how I would handle working with improv, because we knew there would be quite a bit of it because we had a lot of improvisational actors, and we have Paul and Kumail and Patton and people who are going to sort of run with some things off the script. And maybe from his own experiences where that line is of continuing the story, but allowing those wonderful comedic discoveries. And so we just talked about story structure and how we felt about keeping things moving along, but also mining for little pieces of gold, because I think that's such a important thing to the original Ghostbusters. Whether or not it was intentional, I think some of it, because of the talent involved, just seems so off the cuff improvisational. There was no way some of that stuff could have been written. I think that's what audiences have attached themselves to so much. So I think that was one important aspect.
It was also just about the mechanics of us working together. Editing teams are all completely different. Especially as an assistant, I've worked on shows that have had clear divides of I get reels 1, 3, and 6, and you get, whatever Only in those extreme cases would the director be like, you know, I want the other editor to take a pass at this. But otherwise, it's sort of, this is my territory. I have ownership of this. Mm-hmm. And because of the schedule, Shane and I both kind of came to the table with the same sensibility of, we're not going to be able to have any ego about this stuff. Our instinct was to be incredibly collaborative and be throwing scenes left and right. And yes, one of us would tackle an assembly, but we weren't precious at all. If I was stuck on something in the third act, Shane did a big pass. It was a very useful way because the schedule was pretty accelerated. Like, you know, for a VFX heavy movie, I think we had 1,600 VFX shots. I mean, there's CG characters, you know, full on like digital storms. Like, it is a very, very VFX heavy movie. And to do it this fast, we had to work together.
Nathan's right. Like, walking into something like this and knowing it's going to be fast and knowing there's so many, I mean, this is such a massive script with so many characters. We knew we'd have to do a juggling act. And if this is a film where I'm the sole editor or Nathan's the sole editor, obviously it runs differently. I don't really have any interest in walking into a film and having my ego just thrust in the center of everything and being like, this is mine, that's yours. It just doesn't seem like the way I'd want to work. It doesn't seem like it would be the best thing for the film. I think sometimes you're forced into that situation, but that's just not the person I am. And like, the thing is, for me, I'm a fan of Nathan's work, and working with him, I'd see a scene that he assembled and I'm like, this is awesome. I'm not seeing something that I have problems with or that I would do differently. Our sensibilities are very the same. So it was a really cool way to be able to just very quickly throw sequences to each other free from judgment to get our first gut instincts on them before we went to Gil. And this is the first time Gil's working with either of us as a director. So he needed to figure out, does he trust the process and are we working the way that he wants to work? Seeing his vision come to life in the first assemblies. And then once we figured that out really early on, it was very easy to be able to get cuts to him very quickly, even if they were rough, to go, hey man, here's an idea, messing with this, thought about restructuring this. Maybe we could pick up this because we were so close to the shoot, that it kind of all became like a nucleus of creativity and openness. So it was a very safe place to operate from.
Yeah. You said it well, Shane, that like we'd show each other things, and that was more about the collaboration, let's say, is like the actual handoff of scenes didn't happen as much as I might have initially implied. It was more about that we were on the same page and we weren't afraid to like talk to each other, and it became every day like a show and tell. Mm-hmm. Shane and I would show each other the assemblies of like, this is what we're doing. We'd give each other like honest feedback, and in that way we were just like constantly giving ourselves a leg up to one another and relying on the other one to be a mirror.
Yeah. And then when we would hand sequences off, it was like, I'm going to take this other thing on, infuse some of your ideas into this. Some sequences we would do, which were really fun, is there would be so many jokes or so many variables of the way you can cut it. Not that we would cut things radically different, but you would sometimes go, hey, how about we just go in our separate corners, do our own assemblies of this, and then sit together and just watch them and cherry pick the stuff that we discovered. And sometimes it was just a little look, a little bang off of this door or whatever it was. It allowed you to work together to create the best sequence instead of having authority or ownership of something completely on your own.
Totally.
So you guys were over in London working on this. Were you just working at a location nearby the set, or were you actually working on set?
On this one, not so much, actually. I guess towards the third act, I was on set a lot. Especially since in this movie, the villain is completely visual effects, which I thought SPI did a wonderful job. I have to shout out to them. Mm-hmm. There was moments where they shot all the stuff with the actors, and then Gil would be like, okay, work with the second unit director, shoot all the plates you need. So we'd be in there with a crane facing the other direction of the firehouse and be like, okay, this is when Garaka's doing this. And and I have the edit reference with me and cutting it in. And I'm like, okay, I think this is going to work. That part was really fun. Editorial was so close. Unlike Afterlife, where editorial was only in LA and I flew to Calgary towards the end for 6 weeks. The entire time we were just across the street. So Gil would come by every day.
You kind of have to do a quick reset from Afterlife to Frozen Empire. It's been, I think there's like a 2-year span. The Spenglers have moved to New York City and taken up shop in the old firehouse. So you've got to work in a little backstory for the Spenglers and even for the history of the Ghostbusters themselves. Tell me about the devices that you use for doing that reset and how that evolved to get to that sweet spot of educating the audience without slowing things down too much.
That's a good question.
Yeah, that's a good question.
I mean, from the very beginning, we were all on the same page that we wanted this film to sort of feel a little bit like a roller coaster. You know, the beginning is a very horror beginning and establishing that something's coming, something's sealed in this orb. And then we jump to New York and just want to throw everybody in the fact that without exposition, they're in New York. They're together. They're ghostbusting. You know, the beat with the cops is to say, okay, New Yorkers know who they are, and they're kind of now part of ordinary life. And then the scene with the mayor is another one where, because they're in trouble, you get this context. And we had that news segment that was completely done editorially. Now, obviously, they shot the TV. We shot a news thing, but it was the actual voiceover of the news thing. And what the image is shown is something that was constructed in post entirely.
Yeah, because it originally came from the mayor.
And it was like too much mayor.
Yeah, it just really felt like a character telling you everything. We found a way to, come out of the sewer dragon scene organically through a news clip and then sort of roll the news clip into giving you some backstory to catch you up. It was almost like you were taking the roller coaster up, that like tick, 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 tick. And this was the top saying, okay, here's where we all are. And then right after that, we just go for the whole ride.
The other thing that I think was one of my favorite little things that we did in our assembly that never changed. Of course, the writing is there of them talking about, I'm a Ghostbuster, I saved the world. You were a possessed canine ghost dog. And then downstairs, you know, they said what a first date it was, you know, whatever. And then we turned into dogs and got some action. And from the assembly, we put the theme from Afterlife. The Rob Simonson sort of like the very specific, it's Ghostbusters, but it's only Ghostbusters Afterlife. That music to me was callback to bring your memory back to that movie and like make you familiar with these characters a little bit. We do that one other time with the chess game where it's like, oh, now we're playing Egon's theme, where she doesn't know it's melody yet.
Earlier, we were talking about the tone and how to manage the comedic elements. And as you said, you've got Kamel and Paul Rudd and Dan Aykroyd and Patton Oswalt and Bill Murray. Clearly, Gil was okay with improv. How do you guys manage all of that in the cutting room?
I think when I'm putting together a scene like that, you're the first audience, and I just like all those people are funny to me. So while selecting, you're just sort of chucking to the side like all the moments that really make you laugh. I mean, classic one is just Bill Murray's like look up to Kamel after saying puppies, love them or kill them. And then he has that kind of look up from his paper. It's just, Bill just does stuff like that. That's so great. I can't even tell you if that's where that look comes from within that scene. It's just, you chuck those things to the side. And when you start to build the scene, you really get a sense of when you're overstaying your welcome. And sometimes the improv lands better than the line, and sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes it's distracting. And I don't really go off of much, especially with comedy when it's within the script notes. I just like to stay objective to that and think of it as an audience, because it's always easy on set to get swept up in the moment in the comedy, and you're discovering new things. Or like, this is gold, this is gold, this is gold. But when you get in there, it doesn't work that same way. And you just have to keep yourself on pace of like, is the scene still moving along, or am I really just feeling like you're servicing the comedy in this moment more than the character? And that's just a balancing act that you learn over time. They always start fat, and then you just start going like, let's whittle this down, and then you find the right recipe.
I think the scene that kept changing until I found the right thing was the mayor scene. The amount of jokes versus story. Mm-hmm. And it was such a delicate balance. We put one in and you're like, oh, this is so funny. Wait a minute, the next two aren't as funny. It's the domino effect. Quite incredible with these kind of films, and especially the ensembleness and how much this is supposed to be momentum. You know, stopping down for a joke if it's not organic and authentic. And to me, a lot of times, whether or not we had this discussion subconsciously, I think the reasons that the humor can work, especially from Paul Rudd, is if the joke is coming out of insecurity or fear of actually that character would say something. And that was Camille to me, is like he was saying stuff to avoid actually thinking about danger, you know, or responsibility, or the fact that he's a, you know, kind of a sleazy guy, you know what I mean? So it's like, that's the humor has to come out of those things versus this is a comedian saying something funny.
And Venkman is just a wild card and always has been. And so you're looking for a different set of rules for Bill. You're looking for Venkman to challenge the seriousness of the situation. He's always finding a way to undercut the tension. So he's not operating from a place of fear. He's operating from a place of almost like anarchy in a fun way.
Yeah.
So they all have different rules. And then Patton is so well written for Patton to be that like nerdy folklorist underneath the basement.
Mm-hmm.
So when you meet him, you want his comedy to work from a place of like this really educated, misunderstood or not talked to guy who's finally found a moment to matter. So everyone just has their own separate ways to be treated.
As an audience member, when you appreciate a film, you usually appreciate specific things the filmmakers did. And one of the things I appreciated about your film is something you didn't do. You have these big names and these iconic characters from this franchise that everyone knows and loves. Oftentimes what filmmakers will do is sort of a reveal for each character. You can sort of feel it coming. The door is going to open and there's Dan Aykroyd, or tilt up and look, it's Patton Oswalt. You were very matter of fact with these characters, as you would be in real life. That was my interpretation. I don't know if it was something you consciously did or talked about with Gil, but I would like to know if that was something that was ever discussed, how you handle these introductions or reintroductions of these characters.
I know what you mean. To me, they did have these reveals. They just weren't relishing. There weren't like a ta-da.
Right.
It was like the first frame of Ray, he has the magnifying glass blowing up his eyeball. And it's so the idea is the first shot is like, oh my God, it's funny. It usually gets a laugh. And then the shot of Ernie is after this blueprint's rolled out, this big crane move booms down and tilts up to reveal him. But it's within the story. And he says it's Egon's design. So it's just, we're never stopped to do it, but we're still doing it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, the artist did not make a meal out of it, which you didn't do.
Mm-hmm.
Right, that's the best way to put it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think Gil really understood that and shot it in that way where he's doing something special for these characters, but yeah, they're not walking out of the shadows or something. It felt organic enough that it moved along. It wasn't too noticed. Also, you could really feel it if it wasn't built in that way. If you just cut to Dan in the scene, it would just be like, oh, okay, I guess Dan Aykroyd's like, it needed something magical. So I think he did a really good job balancing it in a way that kept it flowing.
This next question, I don't know why I'm asking this, but most of the time when I'm talking to editors about sourcing footage to help tell a story, I'm talking to documentary editors. But you guys have what I think is real footage, not shot just for the film and made to look old, of like 80s era Ghostbusters toy commercials. Were those legit? Did you make them? Did you re-edit real commercials? I can't explain why I find this bit interesting. Maybe it's the nostalgia factor.
No, those were licensed. We pulled those.
I wish that could be recreated. I wish we shot. That was amazing.
Yeah. I think we had assistants scrub YouTube and create a string out, and we selected it and then went to go license it.
Mm-hmm. I think we made fun of the ones with the kids with the proton beams, and Jason was like, hey guys, I had all these toys as a kid. Like, this is what I grew up with.
Right.
What's funny is, like, I never thought in a million years that the sequel to Afterlife would sort of mimic the weird meta-ness of Ghostbusters 2.
Yeah.
Literally, it is like the second big scene in the movie is the birthday party, and they're playing the Ghostbusters song. And to me, Ivan intentionally was doing that to sort of also talk about what it's like to make something that's a hit and that's now a few years old. And he wanted to talk about all that stuff. Mm-hmm. And so to mimic and do our own version of being meta towards the original series, but also trying to be like, this is the continuation of it, was really funny and fun.
I think that's the language of Ghostbusters that Ivan built into it, especially with coming off of the original. But even in the original, the way that they have the montage of them trapping and the city catching on to it and then becoming a cult phenomenon, it's just kind of like, that's what made it so wonderful. It's like, as an audience, you discovered it along with the characters in that film. And because that DNA is baked in, it gives you all these rules that you can do now. And for me, like, I'm born in 83. Ghostbusters comes out in 84. Like, my entire existence, Ghostbusters has been present. People dress up every year for Halloween. That Ghostbusters track plays every Halloween. And I think that Gil is finding a way, his own way to, for the younger audience that's going to discover this movie, say that, this has been around for all of our lives and it's in your life now too. That's one of the wonderful things about how long this franchise has been around.
So you have the legacy characters, and then you have the new Afterlife / Frozen Empire characters, and the new characters that are just Frozen Empire. You have a lot of characters. As you said, it's an ensemble.
Yeah.
Eddie Hamilton does color coding based on characters in his timeline, so you can get a sense of how often a character is present. When you have such a big cast, is there anything you do within the editing interface to keep track of how they're all being employed?
We had colors for our index cards. So you could sort of sit back and get a feeling of when these characters pop up, when.
Mm-hmm.
For timeline stuff, for video, we do clip color based off visual effects versions or source material. If it's dailies, it's default. Unless it's like a different format, which we didn't have any on this, or big VFX plates that are spherical or something like that, then it's a different color. But we had stickers on our index cards on the scene board. I love a scene board. I love having a bigger thing to look at, to sort of reset my brain in some similar way of like when you go to a movie theater and screen your movie, all of a sudden things look different to you. The edit feels different, and it's like it's refreshing the neural pathways in your brain so they're not doing the same thing over again as you sit at your desk. When I stand up and look at the index cards and trying to look at the movie a new way, I think it helps me think structure a little bit better.
Nathan, I think you're the first editor to bring up neural pathways on the podcast. Congratulations.
No, thank you. I am all about neural pathways. I think it's a fascinating theory how we can, like, things get carved in over repetition. And that's very in tune with the editing process to me, how we can sort of get ingrained on scenes feeling a certain way because it's been that way. And then you change it and all of a sudden it feels very different.
It's funny, I'm looking at the scene cards now on this show, and I'm realizing that I don't think I've ever looked at them in my room. That doesn't do anything for my brain personally. And color coding each character sounds interesting, but I don't know that that would do anything either. I think my brain just so works in that timeline only. And unless I'm watching it, do I feel like anything is working or isn't working? The scene indexing for me feels like as you're stacking it all up, it's interesting to know. That's where I feel like we relied on it more. I personally relied on it more. And we're like, okay, what's coming next? And we're doing this. Okay, great. And you would do those with boards, and then you start linking those scenes together, and you're like, okay, here's where we're going. But once it's together, I kind of only exist in that timeline.
So you mentioned the villain is purely CGI, and he's mostly manifested towards the end, and certainly the characters interact with him, but there's another character where they interact with her more, and that's the Melody character that Phoebe interacts with. Was there an actual actor on set with Phoebe that was then removed and then replaced digitally or enhanced digitally, or was there never an actor there and everything was done purely CGI after the fact?
There was an actor there at all times. She was always acting there. And we cut with her performance. I never cut with empty plates. It was all up to SPI. What they would do is they had this process, and it took a long time. And what I mean by that is like each shot had a lot of prep time before they could even show us an early version, meaning that they had basically a rough 3D model that they would match move her to. And we had background plates they would shoot after they wrapped. Director was happy. Then he shot an empty plate where Phoebe acted against nothing, but I never used those performances. It's just for the reference of the framing. So they had visual of what was behind Melody. And so they would take basically a rough 3D model of Melody and match move her arms and face and whatnot. But the fire is so loose, it's not like it needs to be mocap. And then they started painting in the background to make her more translucent and adding all the fire effects. We had distortion. We had even a little bit of smoke, and it took a long time to figure out what that look was. But once we figured out that look, it was like a machine. All of a sudden, all those Melody shots came in. It feels like in November, we had like 4 shots, and I was like, this is crazy late. But by January, we had 90% of them. And they all were looking amazing after development stuff we did early on. It just took a lot of work on their front for the roto, the match moving, and making her translucent. But we cut with a person the entire time.
How much of that do you maintain in your Avid timeline? How many different phases of that visual effect do you even need to manage?
Usually we have dailies, and then Kevin Jolly, the VFX editor, something he likes to do, and I totally understand, is then they have a V0, which is basically the scan of this is the frames they've scanned, and then that goes on V2. If I'm monitoring V1, V2, there's no difference. There's no VFX done yet, but it's from the vendor, meaning it's gone through the pipeline. It's kind of a check on the CDL. It's a check on the scan lengths in case I change the shot or extend the shot. And then after V3 and through V6, we had 3 VFX versions. The most recent and then maybe 2 prior.
You know, earlier we talked about the music and the Afterlife theme, and then you also have Elmer Bernstein's motif from the original. Are they scripted out ahead of time, or is there some flexibility for you guys to feel out how and when to use them?
There was no hard and fast rules about it. I mean, you have the original score to work with, you have Simonson's score to work with. Then those are safe places to go, but we always wanted to make this film feel like we were taking a departure and a step forward as well. So we did a lot of temping with some horror scores, and then romantic scores or sweet family scores, like things that didn't fully rely on the nostalgia to just try and make a pathway for some different tones that a Ghostbuster film had yet. I did a lot of Conjuring scores when you're in the attics or in the lab, just droney, scary sounds that created tension. And then when things started to really go nuts in the lab, I was working with some original Friday the 13th score and these really high strings, these really tense strings. And then we just pulled it back from there, and Dario did a really wonderful job balancing everything. But just like the film has a lot of characters, there's a lot of themes going on in it too. And so music had so many different ideas within the body of the film. And then really it was up to Dario to sort of find out how to balance all that stuff together.
The stuff, Shane, you put together for the comedy, for like the library, for instance, when they're like leaving and going down the hallways, like, you know, the old libraries below, like,
yeah,
that stuff is like classic Elmer, classic Ghostbusters. And that didn't really change. And so we would temp with that because it just felt right in the moment. And then there's other stuff like you're saying, like horror scores, which I then think Dario would Ghostbusterize it and bring it into the correct tone. Because I had an aversion to using like the Gozer theme, just because I so visualize Gozer for like those big bombastic, some of those themes from Elmer Bernstein, that we needed something different. And then Dario did his own thing that's Ghostbusters-esque, but not Gozer, of course. But for temping, we didn't do any of those ones. But it was more the comedy, we were really doing a lot of Elmer.
You know, the introduction of the family in the firehouse, like you were saying, back to the score from Afterlife, those things felt like glue that Ghostbusters pacing could rely on to keep you in that film. But then, you know, we broke the mold as much as we could with what Gil's intentions were in the film anyway.
So if memory serves, Nathan, you had a cameo in John Wick 4. A couple, actually, I think. Did either of you guys make it into this film, even if it was just your voices?
No, Shane's voice almost was final.
Huh. What was I in the phone, right?
Yeah, you were the phone.
It could have been somebody.
Some of my eating might be Slimer, but I doubt it. I think they replaced all of it.
I just wish your character from John Wick 4 was in this somehow. That's what
Yeah, that would be great.
Well, you know, we've covered a lot of ground. I know both of you guys are still working at the moment on other films, very big films. Shane, I hope to be talking to you again later this year. You too, Nathan. I think the only thing left to cover is how many little Stay Puft Marshmallow Men is too many?
Oh, man.
That is a great question.
I mean, personally, not enough. I don't know how everyone feels about the mini puffs, but every screening I've seen, when those things come on camera, it just lights the room up. Yeah. And they're just so funny, and they're so anarchistic. I mean, they're just crazy, and they're killing each other. I mean, it's really funny. I don't know another animated character that exists like them. And for me, I'll watch them all day. Those scenes make me laugh every time. Especially the coda in this with the mini puff burning his face with the lighter and seeing his little smile. It's just hysterical.
Yeah, I love the big wide shot before the pencil sharpening shot in the beginning. That I can watch over and over, and you're seeing a different hilarious, you know, sketch basically of, you know, what's happening. And it's really funny. I think the film struck a correct balance, and it was so cool to be in the preview audiences, and it just ignites the room.
The second you're behind that jar and you see a mini puff move, the whole theater is like, oh, like everyone, it's unbelievable how much that scene shifts once that little piece of magic gets dropped in there. And it's absolutely the right balance for this film, just like any other character. But I mean, personally, I could take a lot more of them in anything.
So it's official then. The Stay Puft Marshmallow Men movie has to happen.
Yes.
I don't know what's happening, but I'm into it. I'm down.
I'm into it.
You just know it's going to happen. If the Minions can take over Universal Studios, what is stopping the Stay Puft Marshmallow Men from being the next big thing from Sony? I'd watch it, especially if Nathan and Shane are on board. Those guys were great today. I very much appreciated their time, especially since they were both cramming this interview in while working on big movies. I know you appreciate it too, and of course I hope you got a thing or two out of listening to the podcast today. Here's another thing or two you can use. New AI-powered script sync and phrase find tools in Media Composer. Plus, new functionality you can use to export transcripts of clips and sequences out of Media Composer. or for automatically creating sub-cap titles in your sequence. And if those things qualify as being news to you, well, that just means you haven't kept up on all the latest with Avid's flagship nonlinear editing system. I just hate to think that you're out of the loop on this, so click that Media Composer link in the show notes and get in the loop. Now then, as I mentioned at the top of the show, I'm probably going to be out of the loop on releasing this podcast over the next week or so because of that NAB thing. And don't forget, if you're going to NAB, hit me up on email and come say hi to me in Vegas. But only at the show. Pretend you don't know me if you see me anywhere else in Vegas. Anyway, I'm guessing the next podcast will drop on April 29th, unless I'm able to squeak something else in beforehand. But here is your homework assignment. Go watch the FX series Shogun. That should be the next podcast, and it would be great if you already knew the show going in. Okay, time to shut up. Me, not you. You've been very quiet this whole time. Thank you for dropping by, but until we meet again, whenever that ends up being, this is Matt Fury thanking you for joining me right here on The Rough Cut.